All right, we're almost done. So we're going to put the panels in. The first thing you want to do is align this vertical SL2 track. The back of these tracks are also numbered, and the numbers coincide with the part of the A-frame that they bolt to. So SL2 is this part of the A-frame, so I will find the track labeled SL2. You want to start with the middle hole here. So we're going to press it up against the vehicle like this. Actually, this is the middle hole. Start a bolt. You always want to work from the middle of the bend down and up. Do not start with the tops or the bottoms. And also, hey Frankie, and also when you remove it from the ends first, removing the middle one last. If you remove the middle one first, it creates too much torque on the ends, and it'll jam your screw. So this first step, we're actually only going to set 2 of these screws. And we're doing that because we're going to remove this again. This step is simply to make sure that this track here does not need to be trimmed off. And if it does need to be trimmed off, we're just going to measure the distance, mark it, and take it and trim it and set it back in. If you have anodized track, that end, you can literally just take a Sharpie and color that end. You'll just barely see the edge of that cut. Take SL11 because this is the horizontal piece that crosses here. And we'll see if we have to do any trimming. I want to fasten this down tight, and I want to make sure I have at least 2 screws in this separated wide enough so that we know it's on the plane that it's in. I did have to tuck it under a little bit, so I'm going to crank this down tight as well. In all honesty, you can leave an overlap. This does go metal to metal, but it will push this flange out just a little bit, and I don't like that look so much. But it's best to cut it. The way I mark it is, now that it's in place, I can basically just take an edge of my knife and just draw a line right across this, the face of this, right where it butts up against that, and I know where my cut line is. When I pull it off, I'll see a nice etch there. I'll take it to my carbide bit chop saw and zip it off. If you have just hand tools, you can use a little hand tool to cut it as well. We're going to do the same thing to the top, so we'll fasten this top one on and run SL10 across, and we'll see if we have to trim that. Alright, the top one fit perfectly, so we're not going to have to trim it, and that may be the case as you move through. You're not going to be trimming much more than a 1/16 to an 1/8 off of these things, so it really won't matter in terms of the fitment of anything else. So you will find that sometimes, again, just because of the OEM holes and the way it lays out in the van, there might be just a little bit of variation. But in this case, we're not having to trim the top. So we're going to pull all these, except for this horizontal. We'll keep it a little bit loose so we can install the bottom panel. Okay, so we shaved our end off and we mounted this, and it's still a little bit rocky, not super tight. And we'll go ahead, we mounted our USB and 12 volts stacked right on top of each other here. It's your choice where you want to put them, but we like that configuration. It just gives us flexibility throughout the van. You have your black and your red power sources. So just make sure, double check that you put them on the correct side. They are marked on the back of these USB terminals. So most of the problem when people cannot get their USBs to work or their 12 volts to work, it's because these are reversed. So just double check you do that before you install them back in your vehicle. All right, after you plug them in, you're going to slip them up underneath that little channel and push this to the side of the vehicle. Once it's to the side of the vehicle, you want to use a little pry bar, or if there's enough space, you can actually use this to make sure that it's sitting up nice and tight to the top. You don't want to jam it up there when this is still a little bit loose, but the point is that to keep this from slipping down behind the floor, we'll put a little set screw in here. I like to do that step, however, after I put this track back on, and that track is ready to go back on. So for right now, I'm just going to slip a little wedge under here to keep it propped up, and that way it won't slip down and I'm fighting it for the future. So we got one right here, and one right here, and that's just going to keep it from dropping. Now we're going to reinstall this vertical track. All right, one little key on installing this when you're setting all the bolts, do not set the bolt to where the actual contour V shape of the screw is set into the channel here. Keep that out, so just the threaded part of the bolt is in, and that way you can line up all your holes first and then tighten it down. Once you've inserted all of the screws like this, then you can go ahead and fasten them down. Now that you've got this in, I've tightened the lower bolts, but I've left these loose so that we can slip this next panel in. This is now where you can make sure that you're pried up nice and tight. The kit comes with these set screws, so I'm just going to use 2 of them. And I like to usually pull it off about 2 inches off the rail and 2 inches up. And same with on this side against the wheel well. They just kind of come out 2 inches and 2 inches. This keeps the panel from sliding down. Once you've done that, you're ready to move up to the next level. You can also move forward. But for this total install, the panels are labeled. There's a key that comes with the panels. And you're just basically going to look at the key, look at the label, and that's where those panels go. The vertical uprights will go in last, basically. So you're going to set this next one, then you can set the lower and mid panels and even the ceiling panels. Once we put this panel in, we'll put the top track in, and then the wall, and then at the end you cap them with the vertical rails. So that's the sort of approach you're going to take. And we're going to go ahead and just panel this thing out. The last panel that goes in, or you could put it in any time after this is fully, right before you fully bolt this down, is this vertical channel that goes all the way up the aft side of the van. To put the ceiling in, we're going to start with the side panels on the driver's side of the van. The first one we put in is the forwardmost panel. It'll be labeled according to this upper track or A-frame that you have here. So this is SL17. This panel is labeled SLC17, and the C stands for ceiling, while the wall panel is labeled just SL17, right? So if it has a C, it's for the ceiling. And with this van, we don't have the front headliner in because there's some optional stuff that Mammoth Vans is doing to this van, and their headliner is going to go in after. So, but it is important to have that headliner in to reference where this goes, because you're going to slip it up underneath this track, right? So this track is dropped down far enough for this panel to slip all the way underneath the entire track, not just the flange, but the entire track. You slip it up over the track and then drive it over into the wall, and that way it'll clear the vertical tracks. So we're going to show you for demonstration, but at the end of the day, they will probably pull this panel after they put the headliner in. They'll bump it up so it's nice and tight against that headliner, and then slip all those panels nice and tight against each other. All right, so here's how it goes, and Nathan will grab the other side here. And it slips again underneath the entire track, which gives it room for clearance to come over, and it should split roughly right down the middle of that first vertical track, okay? And once you put that up, you can then take your horizontal cross piece that goes across the top, also labeled SL17. We're going to rock it in. And then push that in and set your screws into it. All right, now that you got the first panel in, and again, when you'll do this after you put your front headliner in, so in this case we're just using this as a demonstration, but this is the first panel you put in. It's butted up against your headliner in the front. Once this is in, you can just work your way down that ceiling slot all the way through the van. So we're going to put the next panel in right behind it and butt it up against the front panel, and then the rear panel we'll put in and butt it up against the front panel again. The back will get covered with the rear trim, so you don't have to worry about the small gap that's left in the back. All right, now that you put in the panels up on the passenger side of the vehicle, you're going to leave this track just a little bit loose so it still rocks. All right, so don't crank it all the way up when you're putting this side in. And this track is still dropped low enough for the edge of the ceiling panel to slip past the bottom of this track. And we will just do the same thing we did over here, where we slip it in, pull it up, pull this other edge up, put it into that track, and then this will drop down, and we'll keep this track down because you're going to use that distance to put in the very last run on the passenger side. Now the ceiling panel has the tail here. All right, so you're just going to set this side up first and plug it in. It clicks together real simply there. And now when we put it up, we're just going to make sure that this coil sort of stays in the center. Slip it up past. It'll give clearance to go up and into this track right here. So it's as simple as that. When we tighten this side, we'll do this after we set the rest of our panels on the driver's side. So we're going to work our way back. Again, you're going to drive this to the headliner, and then you're going to install the cross piece in the center of the vehicle. So you'll screw this up. Again, leave it a little bit loose so it's rocking, because you're going to put the middle panel in and kind of drive it so it hits the back side of your cross piece. Okay, before you set this center panel, all these center panels in a 170 come long. And the reason is that these, because of this discrepancy of where these ribs are, they need to be special cut for your van. So the back edge is the edge you'll cut, the aft side of this panel, and you'll know that because the tail of the light is wired in the front of the panel. So look at the back of the panel. You'll notice that the tail of the light is where it plugs into your wiring harness is on one side of the panel, so you're going to cut the other side of the panel. To find that distance, there's several ways to do it. What I like to do is right at one of the screws. So here's where one of the screws are located. I'm going to hook my tape measure on the flat side of one of these little teeth. Thank you. Right next to it. And that'll give me the most accurate measurement to the center. So I'm right at the center. I'm taking the measurement to the center of this PEM here. And you'll notice it's right around 71 1/8. And all I do is I subtract 1 inch from that because I'm hooking it on the teeth. And it works out that 70 1/8 is the length that I need to cut. So if you measure 71 1/8, cut it at 70 1/8.
A second method for measuring the center panel of your ceiling on the 170 would be to install both of your cross bracer pieces completely without the panel being in here, and snug them all the way up against the rib in both the front center and rear center. And then we're going to take a measurement from the very front of the lip of both pieces and get a total distance right there. Again, making sure you measure from the very front edge of the entire piece of L-track to the back edge of the forward piece. So inside edge to inside edge. Here on this van we have a measurement of 69.5, and then you'll just simply add 5/8 to whatever measurement comes out, which in our case would be 70 1/8, which matches exactly the previous method we just showed you. Either one will work and get you the same measurement. Measurement from the inside edge of the forward track, coming all the way back to the inside edge of this rear centerpiece. You can see in this van is 69.5. So this inside edge to the inside edge of the piece in front gets you that measurement, and you add 5/8 to whatever you come up with for your total panel length.
Okay, we've cut our panel. So we're going to use the same method, slip it under this track, set it up. Be sure to plug it in before you do this. You gotta go on it. There they go. Go back under. Pull it down, set out. All set. There we go. Okay. Once you've installed this part, go ahead and slip this on over the end. And this one you just want to keep a little bit loose, but it doesn't have to be dangling down. And we'll go ahead and install the last panel. There is one last plug-in. So again, just remember to plug it in. Okay, so these are all installed. These are still left dangling down. Behind these holes are those brackets that you installed, and you can use your little tool, the Allen key here, to find those floating nuts and set your screws into those, and that will pull this ceiling up tight to the ribs. You can do that in this stage. I'm going to do it next and go ahead and install these first, and then I'll go through and work my way back and install all of those set screws in the center. Okay, so we put these panels in. We've left this edge dangling down so we can put it in our side panels. But before we put in our side panels, we want to move on to what we call the slide liner because it's above the sliding door. It's the headliner above the sliding door. And typically you will have your front headliner in already. But again, because of this special build, we're going to do it before just to show you how this slide liner goes in. The reason why is because when we put in the next panel back here, we want to do the same thing that we did on this side, where we kind of bump it up into the slide liner to make sure it's a nice tight seam, and then the aft panel will bump into that, and you'll have a small gap in the very back end, which is covered by the rear door trim. So let's move over here and we'll show you how to get this on. So this is still loose, and it really doesn't have to be dropped down, so we can actually tighten this up just a little bit just so it rocks, but not necessarily so much so that the slide liner passes underneath it. And we're going to pull this gasket down, the weather stripping, and you're just going to pull it down about a foot below the corners here. The slide liner typically will slip behind the headliner and then back into the track. Like that. And this is where it's nice to have the weather stripping out of the way, and you can take it and put it right back up. I typically like to put the middle in first, because you can sort of wedge if you go from one side and work your way over, you're going to end up with too much weather stripping in one side. There's a little flange on this weather stripping, and that tongue will cover the edge of this slide liner and hold it in place. We'll also be fastening through the slide liner on the edge right here. We'll push this up into the ceiling and set a set screw through here to make sure that it doesn't want to slide down. The front of the headliner will be holding up the front of the side of the headliner will be holding up the front side of the slide liner. So now that this is in place, and you can see this little flange, just comes out, covers that edge, and just make sure it's all nice and tight again. And the slide liner is in. Now we can set this ceiling piece and just drive it forward. And again, this will end up being, and make sure you're tucked behind the rail here. There we go. So now we can drive this the ceiling piece right into this slide liner and make a nice tight seam, and push this from the bottom up. So a quick note on this panel: one end is less wide than the other. So it will only fit in one direction. Okay, if you put it in there and the back side is too wide, flip it around, because the back side is actually a little narrower. So we're tied up against our slide liner. This part of the track, we can now, from the brake back, is totally ready to be tightened up. Okay, we've got all the panels installed in the vehicle now. So again, don't forget your sliding door. So we're going to install the lower and upper sliding door panels, and then also the tops of the outside rear aft doors. And if you have a cargo style van, you will also be installing them on the bottom where you set your rib nuts. It's pretty straightforward. So Jared will walk you through that door install, and at that point, barring the headliner in this van, but you would have already installed the headliner, all you have to do now is just put on your B-pillars and you're ready to roll.
Well, we have the wall and ceiling main panels in. The remaining part of the panel kit to put in would be your rear doors and your slider door here. So we're looking at the top slider piece right here. We punched the holes earlier, so they're ready for us. It's easy to start with just a couple. Get one going in the center, and that way it's kind of being held up for you. And then you can go ahead and get the rest of them in. It's really good to start by just getting the bolts threaded and hanging on and not tightening them until you get them all in. There's a small amount of variability in the rib nuts as you set them. So before you close them in, you can just get the threads started, and that way you can make sure you find the home for all 8 bolts before you tighten them up. This would be an example of that right here, where I had to walk it around a little bit, just get it started. Now you've got that hung up, and you can get the other 6 in there. Once the threads are started, then you can go ahead and drive them home. On the bottom piece, the big part of the slider door, same process applies. It's usually good to just get 1 or 2 started in the middle, and then you can work your way around to the perimeter, since those top bolts will be kind of holding it up for you. So with your hand holding up the top, you could place a bolt either the middle or the outside, get one started. Actually, let's try the outside first. Find that first rib nut, get the thread started. So now that corner's being held up for you. Come on over to the other side. Get another one on this top row, find those threads, start it, and don't tighten it yet. So now it's being held in place for you. You can go ahead, go around the entire outside, get the rest of those bolts threaded. Once they're all in there, snug it up. Then you can move on to your rear doors in the top, and if you have them, the cargo door panels. At the rear doors here, we've got our rib nuts set from before. Go ahead and take the panel, same process. Get a bolt through there, find that first rib nut, and just start the threads. And when you got a little bit of grab, panel's being held for you, so you can grab another bolt. If you don't drop it, you can get the next one started. Find the threads, get it started, move on to the next 2, and once all 4 of them in there, go ahead and tighten it down. If you do happen to have on the rear door, the lower portion, when we have this factory trim piece pulled off for hush mat and insulation, if you had the option for the cargo door trim, the piece you see here would be what you'd put on with the handle out. Same process. Start a few threads, get the rest of the bolts going, snug it up, and that'd be your rear cargo door piece as well.
Okay, so we finished everything that we're going to be finishing in this van. Mammoth Vans is going to take over and do their custom work on this van. And that's the beauty of the installer network. So if you're anywhere in the Northwest, Mammoth Vans up in Seattle area are the guys to go to for all of your window cutouts, if you want to put a heater in, any custom stuff that you want to do over the top of the base system. And you can find them at mammothvans.com.
Yep.
You can see some of their work at Mammoth Vans on Instagram. But they do great work. And I just want to say thanks for helping out on this video.
It's a pleasure working with the Adventure Wagon kit. Gives us the opportunity to do all the other cool stuff that we do, so thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Safe driving, guys.